Clearly, no matter how troubled he may be with the status of the communal situation, I think cleanliness in the village takes up a huge part of what he talks about while he's there. So he is there to make peace, but then he will suddenly, give and quite a sharp lecture at various times to people about what he has learned from having been in the West about cleanliness and hygiene, and why, and his basic mantra, which was that, poverty plays a very small part in sanitary conditions. He said it's got nothing to do with poverty. It's a state of mind, and villagers are not listening to volunteers. And it's just a question of making a change. But clearly the amount of time he has spent in the first half of the year talking about trying to tell people that he's against open defecation, why waste cannot be made into compost. They didn't use the word compost in those days. He's talking about making manure, but how things need to be done. This was a huge. It's such a strong article of faith with him that it's not about just the mission he's on, but this is something that comes on again and again. In terms of, I'm going to come back to the village, the Gram Panchayati thing, because as a sociologist, which is what I am, that's the one part of the thesis that I think we have a little bit of problem with, is the whole idea of the village's republic. But apart from that, the fact that he also, earlier we were talking, the idea was to try and see where the women were in all of this. I think two things happen. One, the persona of Gandhi and what he has become by then for the people in the villages is he has access to in most villages, also to what would be the so-called women's space, if you understand what I mean. People are inviting him into their homes, into the place where women are, to be able to look at their homes, look at what is happening. There's a lot of time that he spends there. He makes his big speech on women saying, you are not abala, so I don't like the use of this word. So it's, when you look at it, it was meant to be, it's probably one of the worst crises in India at the time, the level of animosity between communities. But here is a person who is, engaging with it in all of its dimensions. So it's not just that you be, I'm against communal violence, but it's also about the ease with which he can enter this women's space. And there's a level of familiarity, a level of comfort on both sides with having him there, with letting him, and also coming back to the other point, which was his question of allowing women leadership in the movement. Even when he is in Noakhali, there are people from the Congress in a way, but who are Gandhians. There are women who are in charge of different villages. So, Sushila Nair is at some village. There's this other lady whose name is just, it'll just come back to me. I'm getting the alphabets confused in my head. She's in charge of another. She actually goes on a fast for a long time because some daggers go missing, and then he has to come in and sort out that issue. So clearly, empowering the women within the organization to go in and lead, spread the message in other villages which he would be coming to or may not be able to get to at all. But also the fact that he has this ease of being able to go in there and continue to talk about his vision of the village, and to a large extent that will start with the village being a clean space. And number two, being a space where people will not be what he calls dull. I mean, he wants the villagers to be aware of what is happening around them. And yeah, you talked about picketing of liquor shops. I mean, if I bring it up to current times, we've just seen that in Bihar last year or so, and the whole ban on liquor in Bihar is now being is based on that, on the idea that it is the women who demanded the ban on liquor. And so despite whatever else anybody may feel, I think in current, in present day Bihar, a lot of women are quite happy with the lack of violence. But of course there are the other issues with prohibition, which is you set off the other culture of bootlegging in some ways. But if I come back to the notion of Panchayati Raj and the Panchayats having full power is one thing. The problem is sociologically with the other idea, which is villages being complete republics. Because I think that idea is, in a sense, a romanticized idea. It's a question of, a self-sufficient village was never a possibility. I mean, villages in India were never self-sufficient because no village in India produces everything it needs. And I think Gandhi himself would have, in some writings, has had to correct that to say, I mean, we should produce, as much as we can, but we should not send out the things that we cannot. We shouldn't only become suppliers to the city. But the fact of the matter is that the village, and I'm saying something controversial, and I hope I'm not left defending it again and again. I wait till the end of the time of this session. But the village cannot be the basic unit if the only idea connected with it is self-sufficiency, because there's a problem with that idea. In the sense is, I mean, something as integral as salt is not produced in the village. So you're always, when you're talking about villages as republics or as self-sufficient units, I think it has to go immediately with the idea of an interconnected hinterland and an interconnected nation. So the two things need to go together. It is one thing to say that the village needs to produce its own food needs, but even that is, I mean, in terms of vegetables and grains, you can do it. Other items may not all be produced locally. He talked about producing all your own cloth, producing all your own footwear. Possible some places, may not be possible some places. So there's if you were to break it down into its units in a pragmatic sociological sense, I think there would be a problem with that part of the what should I say? That part of the idea, which does not mean that I'm in any sense against the idea as a whole. All I'm saying is it needs to be, in some senses, looked at a little bit more critically and problematized in the sense of how much is possible and how much is not. I'm trying to quickly see what else I had. So I mean, his other points on village self-sufficiency, of course, everybody in the village should tell the truth and be non-violent, and there must be harmony, but we know at the time where we are in Noakhali, there is no harmony, and the village is divided, and you're seeing a side of, that was later to be played out as partition, that people you had lived with all your life could in some senses be turned against you in a manner that had not been seen. He wanted no quarrels, no thefts. Now, and since you were not being able to go out there into a village and set that kind of example, I mean, the call was that each village would have a volunteer who would live that kind of life, that would inspire everybody in the village to adopt that kind of Gandhian notion of life. And since it was not happening in that larger scale, but at least during the Noakhali War, there were people in every single village. And a large part of it a lot of time in different villages is taken up by this notion of theft, and I'm not going to do anything till what has been stolen is returned. And once in a while it is returned, and there are a couple of cases where it is not returned. So I think the interesting part for somebody who's looking at Gandhi at that point, and I'm sure the same happened at other points in his life, is he's not just theorizing. One, he's open to change. Two, he's open to correction. And most importantly, he's open to challenge. When he does the prayer meeting every evening, and that happens through the year, he's willing to ask the people in the prayer meeting as to what he should say or not say. And are they open to, increasingly with the country getting more communalized, people are saying you cannot have an Islamic prayer and we will not allow you to. And so he will say, okay, I'll not do the prayer, or I'll cancel the meeting entirely. Then at one stage, after cancelling a meeting for a few days on the trot, he realizes he's giving in too much to that. So he will then say, fine, I've listened to what you said, but I'm not going to, I will continue my way. If you don't like it, you can walk. But I think the fact of, and that is what makes Gandhi relevant for anybody, in my generation, younger generations, who are still engaging with him again and again, and I think each generation will continue to do that, is this openness to revision, openness to it always being a dialogue, and being open to change. So I think I've also got a trick that I need to wrap up. So I'll stop now and we'll leave the rest for discussion. Thank you.